A recent video was released by the TASS news agency showing the director of Russia's National Guard, General Viktor Zolotov, briefing Putin on how well the war is going and that the Ukrainians in the captured areas are glad that the Russians are there, saying, "I would like to emphasize that we can feel the population of the liberated areas are supporting us. They realize that we are defending their right to a peaceful life and their children's happiness. National Guard troops are accomplishing a wide range of objectives to maintain law, order, and security, and to resume peaceful life in the liberated territories of the Donetsk and Luhansk republics, as well as Zaporizhia and Kherson regions." Putin sat there looking bored at the general comments, and at one point, Putin is shown raising the right side of his closed mouth during the briefing. One can safely assume that by his reaction, Putin had heard it all before and isn't buying it now. The current state of the Russian military. Russia's woes in this war started well before the war even began. It's been long known that Russian soldiers are paid pitifully small amounts compared to their Western counterparts. But exactly how bad that situation was wouldn't become apparent until intelligence reports from Ukrainian and other intelligence services were recently declassified. It was found that soldiers were trading fuel and other supplies for vodka, and that many of them were drunk on duty on a regular basis. Things aren't looking too good for Russian recruiting right now either. It was announced that the newly constituted Russian Third Army Corps had been trained up and was on its way to Ukraine. This new formation, consisting of about 20,000 men, may be less than enthusiastic about their deployment, as it is made up of men ranging in age from 18 to 50 years old. Standards were dropped so low that now volunteers only need an 8th grade education to enlist. The requirement for prior military experience sign up for a 3-year contract was also dropped. The unit has been described as physically unfit and old. This is not what you would call a ringing endorsement. The 3rd is training near the town of Molino, and it doesn't sound like the training is going very well either. Residents of the town have had this to say about the unit. The whole village is suffering because of these volunteers. They walk around in groups and harass. It would be one thing if they were being trained and stayed on their base, but they're walking around drunk from 11 a.m. Another resident said of the unit, "They say they're going to defend us, but based on what we've seen, we won't be sleeping very calmly." Quite a lot of these men are middle-aged, and I guess they lost their jobs due to sanctions, have absolutely no prospects of a new job, and need the money so badly that they are willing to literally risk their lives for a paycheck. I'm only making an educated guess here, but it would seem that the sanctions are cutting deeper than the Kremlin's letting on. The 1,000-troop contingent that was sent to Kazakhstan in January to help to put down protests against the Kazakh government are refusing to leave Kazakhstan because they want nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin is claiming that the reason they are still in Nur-Sultan is because of, quote, the lack of special air transport which is fully engaged in the war in Ukraine. There have been reports that the military commissariats for the Moscow and St. Petersburg areas were ordered to conscript 1,200 men to be trained up and sent to Crimea. These are the two parts of Russia that have seen the most protests against the war in Ukraine. By sending them to Crimea, which Russia claims as its own territory, this gets around the law forbidding conscripts from being used outside of Russia. If the idea is to bring these areas around to approving of the war because their sons and husbands are there, the smoke likely is going to backfire badly. The Russian army's lack of discipline is having deadly consequences, this time involving Russian soldiers and the FSB. 4 FSB officers were out patrolling the streets of Kherson. 3 of the FSB officers, Igor Yakubinsky, Sergei Privalov, and D.A. Borodin, found 2 Russian soldiers, Sergeant Sergei Ubakov and Junior Sergeant Igor Zudin, drunk in a bar in Kherson while in uniform and with their weapons. The FSB men jumped down the sergeant's throats for drinking while in uniform. This was not taken kindly by Sergeant Ubakov, who pulled out his sidearm and started firing shots into the floor. At that point, FSB man Sergei Privalov attempted to disarm him, and at that point, everything started going downhill in a hurry. Junior Sergeant Sudin then opened up on the FSB men with his AK-47 on full auto. Ubakov, Privalov, and Yakubinsky all died where they stood, with Junior Sergeant Sudin and FSB Officer Borodin suffering severe injuries and being taken to hospital. Remember I said there were 4 FSB men? Well, the only person who showed any good sense in this situation was the unnamed 4th FSB officer, who sized up the situation in flash, saw that nothing good was going to come of alcohol and guns, and got the hell out of there before the inevitable shooting started. Smart man. A Ukrainian journalist reporting from Kherson told Sky News that Russian soldiers are known for walking around with a bottle of vodka in one hand and an AK in the other. On August 29th, a Russian patrol received a message, supposedly from the Russian-appointed mayor of Mariupol, that members of the Azov regiment were hiding in a house nearby. Not bothering to authenticate why they would be receiving a message from the office of the mayor at 1 a.m., they rushed to the house and walked into a minefield that had been laid by their own army's combat engineers. Overconsumption of alcohol in Russian society has been known for a long time, and in the Russian army, it's no different. During the Soviet era, a half-liter bottle of vodka sold for 3 rubles and was sealed with a pull-off tab that couldn't be resealed. The only change is now that bottle costs $3. In much of what was the Soviet Union, including Ukraine, making a samogan, what we call moonshine, is an age-old tradition that has become more popular as the prices for the good stuff have been forced higher and higher to try and combat alcoholism. Working under the assumption that the Ukrainian soldiers fighting to drive the Russian invaders out are fighting sober, there is a very good possibility that the stills in Kherson and other Russian-held areas are working overtime to help in the cause of their own liberation. New Russian weapons. At Russia's Army 2022 show, Putin made the claim about new Russian weapons that we are talking about high-precision weapons and robotics, combat systems based on new physical principles. Many of them are years, perhaps even decades ahead of their foreign counterparts, and significantly superior in terms of tactical and technical characteristics. New physical principles? Did Russia just rewrite the laws of physics? Or is Putin trying to blow smoke up our skirt and expecting us to buy it like we did for the last 70 years? Since the laws of physics are immutable, he must be expecting us to believe his bullshit, while there is abundant evidence that, with the exception of a nuclear arsenal, everything we've been told about the great Russian army is a load of crap. If their new weapons are so fantastic, why did they just buy a boatload of drones from Iran, which they can't seem to get working right? Also at the Army 2022 show, they showed off a combat-ready robotic dog. One was dressed in a ninja suit and had a rocket launcher strapped to its back. Another one had an assault rifle bolted on top. Once you take off the ninja suit, it bears a very striking resemblance to a $3,700 toy dog that you can buy from Chinese retail platform AliExpress. The Russian army is also equipping its troops with Technicals, which are Toyota and Mitsubishi light pickup trucks with a 12.7mm heavy machine gun or some other weapon system mounted to the bed. These were made famous by Somali warlords and ISIS terrorists. These are more like decades behind, not decades ahead. In 2015, the Russian army showed off its newest tank, the T-14 Armata, and it had Western military planners worried. The T-14 was displayed as having radical new features that Western tanks lacked. It's supposed to have a laser-activated smoke grenade launcher that fires off any time a T-14 is sighted on by a laser, a system to detect and shoot down incoming anti-tank missiles. A 3-man crew are hidden behind thick armor of the tank's main hull, leaving the turret unmanned, and all aiming and firing done safely away from the ammunition should the turret be penetrated. It has an onboard drone for scouting, sophisticated sensors and data networking, and a high degree of automation never before seen on a Russian tank. It's touted as being superior to all NATO tanks. With a $4 million price tag, it's also less expensive than an M1 Abrams, which has a price tag around $9 million. The Russian military planners told all in attendance that the Russian army was going to purchase 2,300 T-14s by 2025 to update its tank corps. The T-14 is so superior to Ukrainian tanks, it would quickly lay waste to the entire Ukrainian tank fleet. Or it should have. They only procured 132 of their latest and greatest and are not looking to buy any more anytime soon. Instead, they chose to modernize their tank fleet. T-80 and T-90 tanks are improvements on the T-72. Modernization of the T-72 still leaves a T-72 chassis underneath, and that still has many of the inherent flaws that were there when it was first built. While the Russian army is not buying the Armada, they are working hard to get anybody and anyone who ever bought a Russian tank to fork over the money for a fleet of tanks that they themselves won't buy. So much for replacing quantity with quality. Russia should have complete control of the airspace over Ukraine. After all, they've been talking up their Su-57 fifth-generation stealth fighter for years. Invisible to both ground-based and fighter-based radar, it can sweep the skies clear of such ancient technology as the MiG-29. The Su-57's NATO designation is Felon, It's a fitting name not only for the airplane, but for the Sukhoi salesmen who are trying to foist this airplane on some unsuspecting suckers. India pulled out of the program in 2018 because from what their engineers were seeing and from what the Sukhoi engineers were saying, it appeared that they were not talking about the same airplane. When you look at an F-35 or an F-22, you see all smooth surfaces, with the only visible joints being at the cockpit closures and the weapons bays, and even those blend seamlessly into the body. Looking at the Felon, you see bumps, ridges, and access hatches that can only compromise the stealth capabilities. And when you consider that only 16 have been built and 10 of those are prototypes, it looks a lot like the Russians have about as much faith in the Felon as they do in the Armata. New weapons for Ukraine. A counteroffensive and partisans, or how Grandma gets in on the fun. A recent addition to the Air Force of Ukraine is the AGM-88 HARM high-speed anti-radiation missile. This missile's sole job is to lock onto anti-aircraft radar system emissions and destroy them. If the radar emitter is turned off before impact, the AGM will lock onto the coordinates of the radar set and guide itself there even without radar emissions. Lacking full onboard suite for the AGM-88, Ukrainian Air Force is using pre-briefed missiles and Garmin GPS units to launch the missiles. While lacking the near 100% kill rate of the AGM-88 when used with the full onboard suite of electronics used on U.S. fighters, these still have better than 85% kill rate, and if nothing else, they put the fear of God into Russian radar operators as to whether they want to turn their units on or not. Photos and videos of Ukrainian MiGs launching the AGM-88 have been released and are all over the internet. Here's one. You just gotta love the teddy bear on the MiG's dashboard. I mentioned in an earlier video about Ukraine receiving a HIMARS missile system and putting it to good use. The latest addition to Ukraine's inventory is the M270 MLRS multiple launch rocket system. They can fire the AGM-140 tactical missile system with a range of about 190 miles, just like the HIMARS. Difference is this is a tracked vehicle. The AGM-140 has GPS guidance and an accuracy of within 30 feet of its exact aiming point. While the Pentagon has said they've not sent any MGM-140 missiles to Ukraine, Valery Zahalyunaya, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, wrote a lengthy essay for Ukrinform in which he claimed that they had used the missile to attack the Saki base. To date, nothing in Ukraine's home-built arsenal has that kind of range or accuracy, so we'll have to wait for information to determine whether what he said is true or not. The Ukrainian army has been building HIMARS rocket systems out of wood. From altitude, these phony HIMARS are indistinguishable from the real thing. By setting up a real HIMARS in the tracks of the dummy and then leaving immediately after launching, they forced the Russians to expend ammunition in the form of precision rockets, airstrikes, or artillery barrages against a fake threat. The Ukrainian counteroffensive around Kherson is designed to grind down the Russian forces in the area, according to a spokesman from the Defense Ministry. They're using a strategy of constantly cutting Russian supply lines by destroying bridges, road, rail, and pontoon bridges needed to supply the 20,000 troops that are on the right bank of the Dnipro River, making them expend food, fuel, and ammunition they can't easily be supplied with. Essentially, they're starving them out. How well this is going to work remains to be seen. Though, as of September 2nd, 7 days into the counteroffensive, they'd taken back the village of Vysokopia in Kherson Oblast and raised the Ukrainian flag over the hospital there. It was reported on September 6th that Ukrainian forces had liberated the village of Shumitov, which is 19 miles from Kherson and behind the Russians' second defensive line, making that one of their deepest penetrations yet. It should be noted that counteroffensive is on a fairly narrow front. The situation around Kherson is beginning to look like something from early 1945 in Berlin, with the local brass and Russian-appointed civilian officials evacuating to the left bank of the Dnipro River, if not only back to Moscow, leaving upwards of 20,000 troops to fend for themselves on the right bank, with all the bridges that could have been used to either resupply them or evacuate them having been dropped days ago by multiple HIMARS strikes. One has to wonder if that was included in Putin's daily briefing. The southern counteroffensive may have been a feint. The northern counteroffensive in the Kharkiv area is showing some very impressive results. As of September 10th, Ukrainian forces had captured the town of Izium, which is a vital north-south rail hub supplying Russian forces in Ukraine. They have also taken Balaklia, which is another rail hub used to supply troops in Ukraine. If they can hold these two towns against Russian counterattacks, it'll make a major disruption to supplies coming south out of Russia, forcing them to route supplies south through Russia proper and then east to their forces in the Donbass and points south. The Russian army's lack of leadership in the lower ranks once again showed its ugly face with the capture of a lieutenant colonel, a battalion commander, being captured near Balaklia because he had to lead his troops from the front instead of managing his portion of the battlefield. It has been reported that Ukrainians have surrounded about 10,000 Russian troops in a cauldron of the northern counteroffensive, leaving them with the choice of surrender or death. Also, the Ukrainians are facing a problem not seen in Europe since the end of World War II. They've taken so many Russian POWs, they do not have currently sufficient resources to house or feed them. Some would say this is a very good problem to have. Ukrainian partisans have been doing their level best to wreak havoc behind Russian lines and have had some spectacular successes. Ukrainian partisans were an integral part of the August 9th attack on Saki Air Base, which destroyed several jets belonging to the Russian Navy. The air base attack would be witnessed by many Russian civilians vacationing along the Crimean beaches. One video was shot by a Russian civilian vacationing on the beach near the airfield as it was being struck.
Мамулечка, давай, надо сваливать отсюда. Тихо, тихо, тихо. И потом, что надо, да, надо ехать. Нет, это уже какой-то трэш. Мам, да домик ничего нам не сделает, твой деревянный домик.
Бля, надеюсь, это последнее.
The accuracy attack assured that holidaymakers would not be in any danger from the Ukrainians. It did, however, create a massive traffic jam on the Kerch Strait Bridge, linking the city of Kerch in Crimea with Taman in the Kuban region of Russia.
Представляете, на федеральной трассе, обалдеть, вот такая пробка громадная, но еле-еле катимся, но слава богу, что хоть не стоим.
Огромная колоссальная пробка, очень медленное движение, стоим уже полчаса, еще пока скорые.
Вообще не хочу уезжать из Крыма из-за Алушты. Как здесь классно вообще.
Привыкла, да?
Я привыкла, здесь как в своем доме жили, настолько все душевно, по-домашнему.
Дамаскус. Это пиздец.
Some people have wondered why this bridge, which is almost 12 miles long, has not been attacked yet. First and foremost, Ukrainian officials know that Crimea is the Russian equivalent of Florida, the place where everybody goes on vacation, or as Europeans call it, holiday. And they have stated more than once that they have no beef with the Russian people, just with their government. Even before Putin's illegal annexation of Crimea, many Russian families took their holidays there annually. Lacking the capability to destroy the bridge early on, and assuming that Ukraine now does have that capability, dropping it now would strand Russian holidaymakers in Crimea and could be the excuse to turn Putin's special military operation into an all-out war. Secondly, if the war starts to go Ukraine's way in a big way, and the recovery of Crimea becomes a real possibility, it's always best to leave your enemy an isle of retreat. That is, if you're not hell-bent on their utter and total annihilation. Not all partisan activities have to involve spectacular high-profile events. Some are low-profile actions aimed at making the rank-and-file soldier wonder if their government actually cares about them at all. Tons of graffiti has been put up to try and destroy Russian troop morale. Field rations are nothing to write home about, and Russian field rations are supposedly worse than most. Then you add to the fact that many of the rations that have been sent so far have been well past their expiration date, and many of them spoiled. many of the soldiers have just decided to go hungry instead. Ukrainian babushkas have taken pity on the poor, starving Russian soldiers and have been baking cakes for them. These babushkas have even added a special ingredient made famous by none other than Belgunas: rat poison. And it appears that the Russians have taken to giving newly appointed occupation officials new cars when arriving at their postings. That's because the cars used by the previous Russian officials blew up when they tried to start them. Not all Russian appointees were killed with car bombs. Quite a few were simply shot, and a few were even hung. Threat of radiological warfare. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant has reportedly been thoroughly rigged with explosives that can be detonated on a moment's notice. Reportedly, Major General Valery Vasiliev of Russia's Nuclear, Biological, and Chemical Protection Troop told his soldiers that the area around Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, quote, "There will either be Russian land or a scorched desert, as you know. We mined all the important objects of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant, and we do not hide this from the enemy. We warn them. The enemy knows the station will either be Russia's or nobody's. We are ready for the consequences of this step, and you, the liberating warriors, must understand that we do not have a second way. And if there is the most severe order, we must fulfill it with honor." I guess that having learned about nuclear accidents from Chernobyl, they figure they can handle it in case of intentional sabotage with ease.
What are you, fucking stupid?
The Russian army is claiming that its troops stationed in and around the power station have been poisoned by Ukraine. Even if that's not the case, I can tell you from my years working in the industry that any power plant, much less a nuclear one, is no place for someone to be wandering around. These are places with 101 ways to get yourself killed, and none of them are pleasant. Having stationed artillery and rocket batteries on the grounds of the plant in an effort to prevent counter-battery fire, the Russian army brass shows how little they care about not only their own troops, but the worldwide environment as well. The Russian military claims there are no heavy weapons stationed at the plant, but it would seem that counter-battery radar says otherwise. The town of Nikopol sits on the opposite bank of the Dnieper River from the plant. Nikopol's exhausted mayor Alexander Slyuk has said, "Our biggest challenge is that we can't predict what's going to happen tomorrow, or even if there's going to be a tomorrow. We can't comprehend what Russia is trying to do there." While some Russian officials have said the use of tactical nuclear weapons is a real possibility, the final decision on their use rests solely with Vladimir Putin, and he's been sending a very different message. In a letter to a conference on the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, he stated, "We proceed from the fact there can be no winners in nuclear war, and it should never be unleashed. We stand for equal and indivisible security for all members of the world community." Let's hope he believes this. Inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, led by Rafael Grossi, were able to finally get to the nuke plant on September 1st and begin their review of the site. Grossi had this to say, "It is obvious that the plant and physical integrity of the plant have been violated several times. We have spent there 4 or 5 hours. I have seen a lot, and I have my people there. We were able to tour the whole site. We are not going anywhere. The IAEA is now there. It is at the plant, and it is not moving. It is going to stay there. I worry, and I will continue to worry about the plant." Russian media posted a video of Grossi and one of his team checking out a Russian rocket body that was stuck half into the dirt at the plant compound with a Russian official. The official was telling them that despite the Russian marking, it was actually the Ukrainians who fired it, and they had made a U-turn in flight and ended up at the plant. I've heard more convincing lies from my kids. Loss of respect for Putin. Putin's invasion of Ukraine has cost him something greater than blood and treasure. It's cost him and Russia respect. French President Emmanuel Macron has said that the West should not humiliate Putin. That's an easy thing for him to say since there are several countries between France and Russia. It is not, however, a widely held opinion in Eastern Europe. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas has said that she believes that Putin rules in, quote, a virtual reality, and he can pull his troops out at any time and claim victory because he controls all the media and the Russian people would believe him. She said, "Don't worry about Putin's feelings. In the Western world, we'd want to recover every one of our soldiers on a foreign battlefield. Our instinct is to leave no one behind. In autocracies, they don't care because soldiers' mothers aren't going to protest as they would in democracies." Considering that Estonia has a shared border with Russia, her comments certainly carry more weight than Macron's. In Latvia, another former Soviet republic, the Justice Minister has stated that a law banning the Russian language in workplace and business transactions is on track to become law in the near future. This will definitely anger the Kremlin, as about 25% of Latvians use Russian as a first or possibly only language. The Estonian Foreign Minister, Urmas Reinsalu, had this to say, totally supporting his Prime Minister. Raising the price of sanctions could create a stronger push on the aggressor to start to think about ending the war. I think it would be strategically wrong to think that now we just have to be patient and wait for what will happen with the level of weapons delivery and sanctions we have reached. No, we have to ramp up. There's only one person who can end the war, and this is Putin. If the price tag is going to threaten his power position, his pyramid of power, if we push in that direction through our aid and determination for sanctions, this is something that will be a game changer. If our willpower to deliver sanctions is too weak, then it will just be a balanced crisis, a balanced war. And of course, the socioeconomic outcome that Ukraine suffers, also if you look into winter, will be very painful and traumatic. When the EU announced more stringent sanctions against Russia at the end of August, which while tightening the news came short of the total ban that Russian European countries had been pushing for, he said, noting German rearmament and the imminent addition of Sweden and Finland to NATO, among other developments, Reinsalu said, the paradigm on this particular issue is on the move. Tectonic changes have happened in many European countries. The question is whether we have done enough to concentrate our determination into action. And my answer is actually negative. Reinsalu stated that even more sophisticated and longer-range weapons should be sent to Ukraine, including MGM-140 ATACMS missiles for the HIMARS and M270 MLRS with their 300-kilometer range. He said that the West fell into believing a series of myths that have allowed the fighting to drag on as long as it has. First wave of myths was that if we give heavy weaponry, it would cause such an escalation that we would face a nuclear winter. But it has not been the case. Secondly, it was a myth that we couldn't give sophisticated weapon systems to the Ukrainians because they are untrained or unable by their competence to use it. It appears also to have been a myth. Third myth is that we are now out of our stockpiles, that we do not have anything to deliver. And this is actually not the case. We do have enough in our stockpiles. In the coming weeks, if we pass a political decision and deliver these arms also into the front lines, it will make a difference. Genocide is being executed in the middle of Europe. If Ukraine loses, it's going to be a problem for us to look in the mirror due to the shame. The price tag, from the economic and security perspective, and our capability to defend our way of life is going to be enormous. It's going to be a tectonic difference. Reinsalu also added that overcoming Putin will not be easy. He's really dedicated. I have no doubt about that. And we need to describe it very simply. Either Putin's willpower is stronger or us is stronger. And without our willpower being stronger, then Ukraine can't prevail or even survive. In an attempt to demand respect, it was announced that the Russian Investigative Committee would investigate the removal of Soviet statues and monuments in other European countries. How Russia's primary anti-corruption agency will enforce its findings beyond its borders is yet to be seen, especially as neighboring Latvia recently tore down a 262-foot-tall monument to the Red Army and broadcast its destruction live on TV. A week earlier, Estonia removed its Soviet-era monument and was greeted with a slew of cyber attacks, which of course Russia said they had nothing to do with. Lithuania removed its last statues of communist leaders in July, but rather than destroy them, they've all been moved to Grūdas Park in southern Lithuania where they can be viewed. The statues have storyboards explaining who they are of, when they were erected and removed, and what city they come from. Essentially, it's a historically themed park. Economic woes. A report headed up by Yale professor Dr. Jeffrey Sonnenfeld, PhD, took a very close look at the effect that sanctions are having on the Russian economy. The report found that Western companies that pulled out of Russia after the invasion accounted for 40% of their GDP. With imports virtually non-existent, the Russian economy has been deprived of essential materials to properly function, and as a result, Russian domestic production has come to a virtual standstill. Bloomberg reports that the Russian economy is expected to shrink by 12% by the end of the year, if not more. Russia has been buying items on a gray market. This is also known as parallel imports, where items are bought without the manufacturer's consent from a third party in a country where those items can be legally imported and then taken to Russia and offering these items for sale at their regular retailers. It is estimated between May and July, Russia bought $6 billion worth of goods this way. Items bought this way were mostly consumer goods, such as auto parts, gaming consoles, and cell phones. I guess he remembers what happened when Tsar Nicholas forgot that you got to keep the Russian people happy. The Nord Stream 1 pipeline supplying gas to Germany was shut down September 2nd for maintenance to attend to an oil leak in one of its turbines. There are several turbines there that are used to pressurize gas, and the loss of one would not substantially cut the flow of gas through the line. Gazprom first said that Siemens was contracted to repair the leak. However, Siemens said they'd never been contacted to do the repairs, and that there's no reason that the repairs as described could not be done on-site by the regular maintenance crew. Putin cannot afford to cease the delivery of the one commodity that he can still export, natural gas, or the hard currency he receives from it. But he did just that. Kremlin announced September 5th that all natural gas deliveries via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline would be suspended until all sanctions are lifted. That's not going to happen. They have started natural gas deliveries through older pipelines, but they only supply about 40% of what Nord Stream 1 can deliver. It might be a cold winter in Europe with thermostats set between 55 and 60 degrees Fahrenheit, but it will be survivable if Europeans wear a sweater around a house and throw an extra blanket or two on the bed. They'll make it through. Meanwhile, the Russian government is offering up some almost comical excuses for the many shortages without mentioning the sanctions that have been levied against Putin's government by the West. Delicious Full Stop, the company that took over when McDonald's pulled out, has stopped serving French fries, claiming that the reason is due to a poor Russian potato harvest in 2021. They never mentioned that McCain Foods, the largest supplier of French fries in the world, stopped shipping to Russia after it invaded Ukraine. Another prevarication that has been offered up is that smooth, gleaming white copy paper is bad for people's health and that rougher paper is better for the eyes. The reality is that sanctions have made it impossible to import the bleaching agents needed to produce regular copy paper. They get it from Finland and they ain't giving it over. The extent to which Russian companies have gone to keep functioning under sanctions are worrisome, to say the least. Avtovaz, the maker of the iconic Lada line of cars, have taken to shipping cars without airbags, anti-lock brake systems, electronic stability control, or emergency retraction locks on the seat belts. As anyone who has watched any Idiots on Wheels videos on YouTube knows that the majority of those videos come from Russia and that driving a car lacking modern safety equipment is to be courting disaster. Even more worrisome is that it appears that Russian airplanes are flying with equipment that is timed out and should be replaced. Items such as cockpit electronics, emergency oxygen generators, aircraft tires, and engines have to be removed and overhauled on the basis of either calendar date, flight hours, or takeoff and landing cycles. The airlines in Russia have taken to grounding their newest aircraft so as to strip equipment off them to put on older aircraft once those components stop working altogether. This is evidenced by the fact that a nearly brand new A350 is being disassembled for its parts. Hundreds of jet airliners are on lease to Russian carriers, including Aeroflot, and are up for repossession because their lease payments have not been made. Putin's government, however, will not allow them to leave Russian airspace. Wrap up. Putin's war in Ukraine has ravaged its economy and cost thousands of lives. It's laid bare the inadequacies of its once vaunted military for all to see, and in that it has cost it the respect and fear of its neighboring countries. As its international standing continues to deteriorate and sanctions bite deeper and deeper, how long the Russian people will continue to accept the decline in their standard of living and the loss of their sons before civil unrest starts in earnest remains to be seen. Well, that's it for today. Feel free to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. If you'd like to support the channel, visit our Patreon so that we can keep bringing you more videos. So long, stay safe, and thanks for watching.